So you imagine you are on the subway on your way to work. It is peak hour. It is stuffy. It is crowded in that train. And just a few seats away from where you are standing, there is a baby who is crying up a storm, screaming his lungs out. And then suddenly some irate businessman just snaps and he starts aggressively yelling at the mother to shut the kid up. The atmosphere unfortunately turns pure ice and it's awkward and uncomfortable for everyone that is sitting there on the train. So what do? If you're a main character in this movie, you simply do less than nothing. You actually put in your earphones and you turn up the music and you try to drown it out and pray that your train arrives quickly to its destination. Finally, you get to your destination and you get to step off. Your phone rings though at that exact point and it is your ex on the phone. It is an intense and heavy conversation that you are having with your ex. You're walking, you're talking, you're sort of just following the crowd in front of you, until you realize that the crowd starts to dissipate and there is not that many more people around you. The white tiled hallway is completely silent and your call just simply drops out. No reception, right? Because maybe you've been walking too far and now you're in a deep tunnel and you need to get yourself out. And so you follow the signs that lead you to an exit, which is exit number 8. You turn a corner and then there's a businessman that walks past you in a quick pace and then it goes quiet again. You turn another corner and the exact same businessman walks down past you at a quick pace. And that's when the panic hits or the realization hits you that you are actually walking in a circle. Welcome to exit 8. By the end of this video, you are either going to feel like a complete genius or you're going to question everything in your reality. Today, we are breaking down the movie Exit 8, the plot, the hidden rules, and what is actually happening here at this location. And an ending that feels quite simple until you actually think a little bit deeper about it. Now, this film is based on a viral 2023 indie video game, a walking simulation game as you have it, and it's created by Kotak Create, I believe. The game is quite simple to do. You are walking down a Japanese metro corridor. Your aim is to spot the supernatural glitches in this hallway, so called anomalies. Basically, this is a spot the difference game, and if you are good at spotting differences or you have good attention to details, then you'll reach exit 8 very quickly and you'll finish the game. Now, the movie follows this rule, and it starts in a jarring first-person perspective where you are the person looking out at the world, putting us directly in the shoes of our protagonist, whom we'll just call, or they call, the lost man, because this character never actually gets a name. You just know him as the lost man. Now, the phone call that he takes at the start of the movie is from his ex-girlfriend. She reveals that she's pregnant, but asks a very vague question, and it repeats itself throughout the movie quite a bit, which is, so which is it? Basically asking him to choose, which is important because he has to make a lot of little choices in this movie. But in this instance, the question is to determine if this guy wants her to keep the baby or maybe not. And you get the feeling that he really is not ready to be a father and he sort of wants her not to keep it, but he doesn't want to say directly. I mean, looking at the character himself, the way he's dressed, his mannerism, he's definitely more like a little boy than a man, which is, I guess, a right casting for this role. Whilst he's having this conversation, you can see what he sees. At first, the scene is quite normal. You are following a bunch of business people walking quickly out of the subway station in front of you. But one turn here and then one turn there, and you start to realize that the people walking in front of you start to disappear, and there is not that many people now around you, and it starts to get very, very quiet. And then obviously, because you're walking maybe further into the tunnel of this subway, your phone cuts out. At this point in time, that is not a sort of out of the ordinary thing to happen. Maybe it's quite normal. You have just hit a dead zone now in the under tunnel subway. As he moves through the corridors towards the exit, he soon realizes that he's stuck in a loop and keeps going back to exit 0, even though he wants to get to exit 8. Now, as we said earlier, he's walking down this corridor. He starts to realize that he's walking in a loop because he keeps seeing the same things over and over again, and it keeps pointing to exit 8 to go this way, but then when he comes back to the start of the loop, it's always saying exit 0. At first, our guy is shockingly really calm. He doesn't really act too much. He just sort of goes, huh. But he just continues on walking down this tunnel, this little trap, this little labyrinth of maze. And he stops to ask that businessman that keeps walking past him, aka titled The Walking Man, for some help. This businessman, though, just ignores him and walks past at his quick pace. But then suddenly, he stops. And you, the protagonist, turns around to the creepiest and most unhinged smile on earth. And that is when you know something is not quite right. Finally, our protagonist acts like a normal human being and he bolts and runs away, obviously, from the creepy man. He spots a sign on the wall outlining the rules now of the loop. And this is where you find out what the rules is to hopefully get him out of it. Rule 1. Do not overlook any anomalies. Rule 2, if you find an anomaly, turn back immediately. Rule 3, if you do not find any anomalies, do not turn back. And then rule 4, go out from exit 8. So it's quite clear, spot some differences from before. It is anomaly. Everything looks dandy and the same, then you keep going forward. And then once you reach exit 8, then you are out of the game. Sounds simple enough, except the anomalies sometimes are so subtle that you really don't know what is true and what is not true and what is part of the game and what is not part of this loop now. Now, thankfully, as the movie continues on, a director shifts the camera to third person pretty quickly, which is good. So you don't get that Blair Witch sort of motion sickness view the whole movie, which I'm glad for. This allows us, though, to actually see the surroundings and play along to spot the anomalies. And let me tell you, the movie set is an identical, pitch-perfect reflection of the game. This is where the movie gets into your head. It's not about creepy jump scares. It's about psychological doubt. Did that door handle just move? Is that poster slightly different from before? Or is that walking man walking a little bit faster or a little bit more differently? Or are you just now overthinking it a little bit too much, which is what the protagonist will feel and also the viewer at the same time. But just when you think you've got the hang of it and you know what is different and what is the same, the level will reset if you make a mistake and the anomaly gets way more aggressive as the level keeps going up. At first, our protagonist thinks he's got the hang of it and he's starting to go through the level. So at some point, he reaches exit number 4. So you're about halfway through the game for him. So he's about to almost get out of the loop because he's 50% of the way in. But then at that point, he receives a call from his ex-girlfriend, which I thought was very suspicious because if you're stuck in the loop and the phone dropped out, why suddenly will you get reception when you're exactly in the same spot? For me, I thought an anomaly, do not pick up, but the protagonist thinks otherwise and thinks it's a normal occurrence. So he continues to sort of continue on with this conversation on the phone and it picks up from where they left off, which is her and him discussing the pregnancy. Now, at this point of the conversation, he tells her about the altercation that happened on the train, about the mother with the crying baby, and then the aggressive businessman that started abusing her, and about how nobody on the train did anything about it and then just let the situation be, including himself, who I guess he deemed that he was being quite cowardice about because he starts to get rather dramatic and starts crying tearfully. And I would say it's a little bit of an overreaction in this state, especially when he showed pretty much no emotions about being stuck in the subway, when I would have really freaked out about the whole being trapped in the loop situation, but he was very sort of nonchalant about it, whereas talking about this situation with not defending a stranger, he was overly emotional. But I digress because I guess that's the point of the movie about his sort of lack of ability to be a man about things, right? As we'll see later. So from this reaction, we know not only is this story about the remake of a video, and it's not really about jump scares, it is more about, I would say, a deeper look of insecurities of our main protagonist. But while he's on the phone call with his ex, the ex goes, well, I'm waiting for you, just come to me then. And the ex appears in the subway. And at this point, now everybody knows. If you had, as a viewer, had your suspicions, you were rightly so to be suspicious that this phone call is actually an anomaly and not a real situation. And so it then resets him back to exit 0, which is a brutal reality. And this is when he loses a little bit, but then he picks himself off the ground because he has a little breakdown about it, and then he starts the game again, because what else is there to do? Your little tantrum is not going to do anything to get you out of the tunnel. And then he meets the boy. A young boy appears in the corridor. At first you think a random child in a haunted tunnel. Definitely an anomaly. He turns around and books it, but the counter resets anyway, back to 0. Therefore you know now that the boy isn't a glitch. If he's not a glitch, then why is there a young boy in the tunnel? And what is he? It turns out the boy is another player and has been following the walking man, that businessman that we saw earlier that kept walking past that main guy at a very steady pace and with a really creepy smile. It turns out that the walking man also used to be a similar lost soul like the lost man in the main story. And he initially paired up with the boy and they were trying to get out of the tunnel together, and they successfully made it to exit 6. However, after a series of resets, because he failed to pick up on some anomalies, even though the little boy notices them, but he's not a great listener, is he? Nope. So because instead of listening to the boy, he just takes it on his own sort of initiative and says, let's go ahead or let's turn around. He then keeps resetting the game. And so instead of listening maybe to the boy after the 5th time that you didn't listen to him, he starts to get rather angry and aggressive about it. And it enrages him, and then he starts to get quite desperate by being in the loop for so long. The walking man's ultimate downfall happens when he turns a corner at one point in time. He spots a staircase and is convinced that it is the way out because it is got exit 8 on it. The boy, however, realizes that this is a trick because they haven't been like going up like number 1, number 2, number 3. It just goes from maybe 0 and then suddenly it's number 8. The boy knows that this doesn't feel right and tries to pull the walking man back towards him and to go back the other way because now it's an anomaly. But the walking man is completely desperate at this point and still arrogant and still a bad listener, and so he continues on. Honestly, I guess if you've been stuck there so long, I do not blame him. Fair enough. Maybe he just needs to use the bathroom ASAP, because that was like one of my biggest concerns watching this film. I was like, where do you go to the bathroom? Where do these people do their number 1s or number 2s? Especially because one of our characters, the lost man, drinks and chugs down a bottle of water really quickly. And I was like, oh no, you don't want to do that, because the quicker you drink it, the quicker you're going to need to go to the bathroom. And I don't see any here unless you're just going to go in the corner, which is probably an option. But that's where my mind goes, but nobody else in the movie cares. There is no public toilets in the loop, but anyway, it's not that important. So we need to go back to the story where the walking man tries to drag the boy up the stairs anyway with him. They struggle, the boys is like fighting against him, and he finally sort of pulls a bit too hard and the boy falls backwards and cuts his face on the ground because he like smushes and falls. And the walking man decides, you know what? Whatever, stuff you. If you're not going to come with me, I'm just going to abandon you and I'm going to save my own skin at this point in time. He sprints up the false stairs alone. By prioritizing his own selfishness and his need to escape and ditching the kid, he walks straight into the tunnel's trap, unfortunately. And then the entity, or whatever the tunnel is made of, absorbs his humanity, I guess, or his life completely. And then he just becomes a permanent empty background character now in the game to wander the halls forevermore. The Lost Man, though, in contrast, is a much better listener, has more sort of fatherly figure vibes about him. He, instead of being like arrogant and a jerk about it, he actually pays attention not only to his surroundings, but to the boy. And together they finally start making real progress through this maze and tunnel. Now, like I said earlier, as you move up in the levels, the anomalies stop playing nice and stop being very subtle and start getting quite aggressive to stop you basically from achieving your goals. They get way more aggressive and also more freaky at the same time. We're talking like posters and walls that start bleeding, and then there is these nightmarish, mutant-like, hairless rats that appear on your screen with body parts attached to them like a human eye and a nose that starts crawling over the vents and towards you, and it is pure terrifying disgustingness, something that is pulled straight out of a nightmare, which I guess is why this movie is classified as a bit of a horror, a bit of a psychological thriller, which lives up to that sort of scenes in the movie. But luckily, if you sort of run away from it and turn back the other way because you've noticed an anomaly, it will at least reset the game again at the new exit point. So if you level up, so if you go backwards once you see the mutant rats, you've basically achieved your rules, which is you saw an anomaly, you turn back quickly, and then you moved on to the next level, and luckily that disappears. So as they're moving through this game, the lost man and the boy get to spend a lot of time together and realize that this little boy, who initially you thought was mute because he doesn't really speak, he only just gestures and uses his hands to point at things, he's not mute, he's just really, really shy and maybe apprehensive about talking to a stranger. But because he spent so much time with the lost man, he now starts to open up to him. And the little boy confesses to the lost man that he's down here because he ran away from his mum because he was angry at her and wanted her to sort of look for him and sort of make her worry a little bit. Because this movie is about symbolism, it's not as simple as a boy gets angry at his mum and runs away, but it's a symbolic sort of push for people in life who harbor a subconscious need to sort of get lost or escape their reality because maybe it's a little bit dull or it's a little bit unsatisfying. So they want to subconsciously not be where they are, which is what the boy symbolizes when he runs away. The boy wanted to escape his mother's rage. The lost man wanted to escape the reality of his surprise pregnancy from his ex-partner. The boy also confesses that he's never met his father, which mirrors the lost man's own childhood trauma of growing up without a father. Hence why I think his reluctancy to become one himself is what sort of stands in the way and why he doesn't feel ready to enter into fatherhood. The boy becomes attached to a protagonist, obviously because of all the time and all the confessions that he makes. And the little boy gives him a little hermit crab and he says that it's for good luck, which is a very sweet gesture in the movie. Now, once the two of them reach exit 6, because they are progressing and they're doing really well, the corridor is suddenly flooded, which is also an occurrence in the game where the tunnels get flooded by polluted water. Although the lost man could just run and save himself, he doesn't. He goes back to the boy and holds him up above the polluted water and even pushes him onto like a subway ledge and sort of just let him sit there so the water's like rushing through him. It's a very Jack in Titanic moment where he lets Rose get on the door and he stays in the water. It's very much reminds me of that scene where the little boy is Rose. He's sitting on a ledge where he's away from the water being safe and he's sort of just being dragged by the current of this polluted water. But unfortunately, the water current is quite heavy and strong. It rushes through and sweeps the man down the tunnel. Now, during this sacrifice, this man has a vivid vision of a beach and he's there with his partner and their future son, which turns out to be the boy in the game. By sacrificing himself to save the child, the lost man symbolically conquers his fears of fatherhood in just that little moment and accepts his responsibility of what may come. Now, as this sort of revelation comes about, you realize the boy is a supernatural manifestation of the lost man's unborn child. And his fate, the little boy's fate, is tied directly to the protagonist's willingness to accept the responsibility of fatherhood. In the movie, you see the boy regain consciousness after the flood has come through, turn the corner to get to exit 8, and pretty much leaves the tunnel and finishes the game. Now then the lost man appears a short while later, initially doubtful on whether he sees the exit A as the real exit A and initially is a little bit fearful that he's being tricked. However, he finds a little hermit crab shell that the boy gifted him earlier for good luck, and this potentially gives him courage or makes him realize that the exit is real. I don't really understand how that would happen just by seeing a shell or what more symbolism it had in the shell, but regardless, it makes him realize that this is the right exit 8 and he walks out of it and suddenly he's right back to the real world and he's back where the subway tunnels are, but it's more active now. So you know as the viewer, oh, he's escaped the game. So straight away he calls his ex-girlfriend and promises that he's on his way now to the hospital because I think he wants to sort of join her in this journey and become a responsible man. Now, there's just one more scene before the movie completely finishes, and it is the final scene of the film, which brings the psychological theme all into a full circle. Back in the real world, the lost man is now back on the subway in the carriage, and you know it's not the game because, like I said, there is plenty of people around. It is peak hour again. He boards the same carriage as he was on at the very start of the movie. It mirrors the opening scene. He encounters the exact same situation where there is a crying baby. There is the mother who is the same mother, and then there is the rude businessman who is berating the embarrassed mother and telling her to shut the kid up. Now, in the beginning of the film, like I said, the man ignores it, puts in his earphones, and is purely indifferent to the situation or a bit cowardice, so he does nothing and just and exits out. This time, though, altered by obviously the journey he's gone through in the tunnel, and through everything that he's seen with the boy, you see him step off the screen and move towards the sort of mother situation. And then the movie just ends right at that point. So because you don't actually get to see him take his next action, the viewer will then decide what he did. I think the movie for me implies that he went and turned around to do something about it and stick up for the mother, and in which case you don't need to see where else that leads to, or he could have just moved off to the carriage. But I think for the most part, because of what the intention of this movie is that he's now a changed man from his journey through the tunnel, you would hope that he's now gone and defended the mother. Now, if you look closely into the film, you will notice that it's absolutely packed with hidden messages and heavy metaphors. In one of the artwork hanging on the corridor walls, it's a famous painting by M.C. Escher, I think his name is, and the painting itself is called Morbius Strip 2, which features these creepy red ants crawling along a three-dimensional figure eight. People that obviously know art or a bit more attention detail than I was, because I didn't know or recognize it myself, have pointed out that this is a massive metaphor for our main character, and honestly for maybe all of us in our lives. It perfectly mirrors the life of every single communist currently trapped in the modern sort of rat race, just repeating life over and over again because the ants are working ants and they're going around the infinite loop and they can never get off it. And sometimes that is what people are feeling like, commuting every day to work from their 9 to 5, coming home, getting up, and then doing it all over again. It sort of symbolizes what the man's life is and maybe what your life is as the viewer. If you think about these industrious little ants, they spend their entire lives marching along a giant figure eight. And if you turn a figure eight obviously sideways, what do you get? The infinity sign. They walk their path over and over and over again, putting in maximum effort, but ultimately getting absolutely nowhere. They are completely trapped in this loop. It is unfortunately a brutal, sad reality hit for some humans. We wake up, we squeeze into a stuffy train, we go to work, we come home, and we repeat, just like the ants in this art piece. The movie is subtly, or maybe not subtly, asking, are we actually trying to escape exit 8, or are we living in it and just content with it and we stay in this tunnel forever? Then we have other viewers who are looking deeply into the symbolism of the game itself, and they're sort of saying that because it's exit 0 all the way to exit 8, it is intentionally a symbolism for the 9 months of pregnancy, where this is significant to the lost man himself, who will have to go through all these stages with his ex should he unite with her and decide that he wants to join, parenthood with her, and he'll have to take responsibility and cycle through her sort of pregnancy time. Then you have the posters that move around in the movie, and I think in the game as well. And when the posters of eyes follow you around, one of the many anomalies which represents, I think, the overwhelming feeling of social judgment and the sudden pressure of being watched all the time. The lost man feels the weight of accountability, realizing that his choice will heavily impact another's life, is what that sort of scene is meant to symbolize for him and for the viewer to realize. Now, this is my feeling for the movie overall. I think it's a decent walking simulation game, obviously, but the thriller is quite meh, a little bit in the medium sort of vibe for me. Exit 8, I think, deserves a good gold star for being able to transform a very simple 20-minute walk down a hall game into a psychological thriller. By minute 45, I felt like I was watching less like a high-stake thriller and more like a repetition of the same scenes over and over again. So I think the good thing about this movie is that it took a very simplistic 15 to 20 minute indie game about walking down a hall and stretching into a 90-minute feature felt like a very big task, but it was achieved by the director. For the most part, it actually works. The transition from random game anomalies and watching them into heavy metaphors for pregnancy and parental dread and sort of symbolizing a repetitive life was very clever and well done. Unfortunately, though, the middle of the movie started to get really slow for me, and it felt like rather than catching a fast train to work, you are snail walking yourself by bus service, right? By a bad bus replacement service. The film drastically struggles to keep the average viewer, which is myself, captive for the full runtime because some of the symbolism either was lost on me or was not really that exciting, and the message was like, either I've already heard it before, like you're talking about pregnancy, about his need with fatherhood, or you're about societal sort of pressure. So it got a little bit boring in the middle, I would say. The loop relies on repetition, seeing the same white corridors, and the tension unfortunately just evaporated for me. And the movie bordered on, like I said, genuine boredom. You can only look at white subway tiles for so long and the same characters for so long over and over again before I started to lose concentration and wanted to look at my phone instead. Then my other little gripe with the film is the filmmaker tries to add complexity by giving backstories to random background characters like maybe the walking man, but they completely, I think, fumbled on the main guy. If they had actually fleshed out the lost man's childhood trauma and why he was so reluctant to be a father himself, then it may have made his situation a little bit more dire and his conversation with the boy a bit more tear-jerking during especially the high-stake moments where he's saving the boy over himself. But instead, it made me didn't care whether the characters survived, got through the exit, or stayed in the subway forever and ever. Honestly, I didn't care about his personal redemption arc very much. I get that he needed to be a bit more responsible man, but being the only arc for me was not that interesting. What I would have liked more is, like I said, his backstory, why he is the way he is, and also a little bit more of an investigation of why that tunnel existed, on how this magical or demonic looping tunnel actually came to exist in the first place, and why does it know to gobble certain people up. Even with the walking man, we never got the backstory of why he got trapped there. Was he in the same situation as the lost man, where he might have had a situation where he was not being a responsible father and therefore he was trapped in there, and the boy reappeared at him as a manifesto for him to sort of have a redemption arc as well. But we never got into that. We just got the contrast of one man that doesn't listen versus one man that does, and therefore one was able to escape, and then the other was stuck in the game forever. So my overall rating for this film would be a 3 out of 5 stars, a solid concept that gets a little bit bogged down by its own pacing, I think. You come for maybe the scares and the mutant rats, or maybe you're just stuck there because there is nowhere else to go in the theater. Did you like this movie? If you've watched it, let me know in the comments below. Did you like the recap of the movie, or have I made you more curious about it? That also let me know. Thank you so much for listening to my recap. I'm trying a movie one out rather than a book because it was still a very interesting sort of movie and an interesting concept. If you like a movie recap, obviously as usual, like, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.